In this video, we're going to talk about the gender of Spanish words. You might already know that in Spanish, nouns are classified as either masculine or feminine, and that might strike you as a little bit unusual. We don't do that in English, and we think, how can a word be masculine or feminine? It seems a little bit odd to us at first, if you're fairly new to Spanish. But it's actually a relatively common thing. There are a lot of languages that have gender. And gender, even though we call these words masculine and feminine, those are really just kind of categories for the words. It doesn't have to do with being a man or being a woman, as we'll see. The word gender itself really just kind of means category. We have some related words in English that we use, like genre. We talk about the genre of literature. Is it fiction or nonfiction? Is it romance? Is it etc.? So genre is a way that we can classify books, or also movies. We can classify that way. And another word that we use in English that's related to the word gender is the word genus. If we're talking about like scientific classification of plants or animals, every living thing has a genus. It's really just a category. Gender, you can see the connection between the word gender and between these two words. It's really just another form of these two words. It's a category. And so Spanish happens to categorize into the genders of masculine and plural, but it could just as easily categorize them as black and white or up and down. They don't even have to be opposites. It could categorize them as red and blue if it wanted to, or whatever the case may be. It just, for whatever reason, has come down to us as being categorized as masculine and feminine. So that's a little bit about the word gender itself and how it really just means to categorize. Now let's take a look at what this means for us in Spanish. So we do have our two categories, masculine and feminine. We have a general rule in Spanish that if a word ends with O, it's going to be masculine. Now that is a general rule. It is not by any means an across-the-board rule, but words ending with O, or I should say nouns ending with O, that's really probably a better way to say it, tend to be masculine, and nouns ending with A tend to be feminine. Again, not an across-the-board rule, but as a general case, that is the rule. And so we could think about lots of different words. For instance, the word libro, which means book, that ends with O, it's masculine. The word zapato, which means shoe, is masculine. And we could go on and on with this. There's lots of different ways to say car. One way is auto, that's masculine. Now we say it ends with O, but if we made these plural, we added an S, they would still be masculine. Words ending with an A, feminine words. The word for table is mesa, that's a feminine word. The word for shirt is camisa, it's a feminine word. The word for computer is computadora. There's another word too, but that's a commonly used one, computadora, that's a feminine word. Again, if these ended with S, they would still be feminine. But this is just a general rule. There are definitely exceptions to the rule. And so let's take a look at some of those exceptions. There are exceptions, and also there's the fact that not all nouns end with O or with A. So some exceptions are a lot of words that end with ma, pa, or ta are masculine, even though they end with A. If it ends with these, they're more likely to be masculine. Some examples are problema, sistema, a lot of mas, not as many of the others. Planeta, mapa for a PA word, and mapa. So these are exceptions. It's not the case that all the time if it ends with MAPA or TA, it's going to be masculine, but often it will be. On the other hand, there are some feminine words that end with O, such as mano, which means hand, radio, moto, photo. Now in the case of moto and photo, the reason that those are feminine is because they're actually short. Moto is short for motocicleta, Foto short for fotografia. And so the longer forms of the words end with A and are feminine for that reason. But these words get shortened, they stay feminine even though the shortened form ends with an O. So there are some exceptions to the O and A rule. Now let's look at words that don't end with O or A. There's a long list of common feminine endings. So some of these are sion and sion again, but spelled slightly differently. Now these are not full words, and so I'm putting the hyphen in front of them to show that they're not full words. We're talking about word endings here. We have dad and tal, and tu, and umbre. If we see these things, they are almost always going to be feminine words. So la precisión, la atención, la fidelidad, la lealtad, la libertad, la actitud, la costumbre. These endings are going to be feminine just about all of the time. We need to pay attention though, especially with our sion words, because it's also common for us to end with ion without the C or the S in front of it, and those words are masculine. So that gets a little bit tricky. For instance, we have the word for airplane, which is avion, and the word for truck, which is camion. Those are both masculine words. But when we see that ion, we're so used to it coming after a C or an S that we might accidentally think that these words are feminine, but they're not, they're masculine. So that gives us kind of an overview of what types of words to expect to be masculine or feminine. Now again, those things are almost always general rules and not hard set rules, so don't be surprised when you see exceptions to that. But that's the general case for us. Now another thing that we need to address is that words, if they refer to animals or people, they often take the gender of the animals or people that they refer to. Especially when talking about animals, it's not always the case, but if we're talking about like a specific animal, for instance, the word for dog is el perro, but if somebody's talking about their pet dog, who happens to be a female dog, it's not uncommon to hear them say la perra. That's not necessarily strictly correct in Spanish, but it's definitely very common. And so we would get that with animals that are commonly pets, like dogs, cats, rabbits, things like that. Again, if we're talking about a specific one. Otherwise, the word will just be what it is. For instance, the word tortuga means turtle and it's feminine. That's going to be feminine all the time. It just is. And other words are just going to be masculine all the time, even though they refer to animals, which could be masculine or feminine themselves. When we talk about people, a lot of times we have a masculine form and a feminine form of the same word. So for instance, the word for boy is chico. There are other words for boy as well, but that's one. The feminine form is the feminine form of that chica. We change the O to an A. That's pretty common. Grandfather is an abuelo. Grandmother is an abuela. Not all things are that way. For instance, we have padre for father. We have madre for mother. In all of these cases, these can be combined. So for instance, abuelo is grandfather, abuela is grandmother. If we combine, and we're going to talk about grandparents, we take the masculine form and make it plural. So grandparents is abuelos. Parents is padres. And so forth. Children could be chicos. And this goes on and on and on. If we're talking about a group, we're going to take the masculine form, make it plural, unless we know that all of these people are females. So for instance, if we wanted to talk about my two grandmothers, of course we would go with the feminine form and say abuelas. But if I'm talking about my grandparents, it's going to be abuelos. Continuing to talk about people, there are other words that, a lot of profession words, for instance, that might have a masculine and a feminine form. So for instance, the word profesor is masculine. It means a professor or a teacher. But if we're talking about a woman, we would add an A to it and say profesora. The word doctor is the same. Doctor, doctora. There's another word for doctor, though, which is médico. And in this case, we'll do like we saw just a minute ago. Médico is the masculine form. If it's a woman who is a doctor, she would be a médica. Then there are other words that don't end, that end with an E. And in those cases, we just leave the word the same and we would change the article. So agente, for instance, could be a man or woman, and the way that we tell the difference is we say either el agente or we say la agente. Presidente is a word like that, although it's becoming common to say presidenta if it's a female president. Historically, that wasn't really the case, but now we're seeing that sometimes that E changes to an A instead of just saying el presidente or la presidente. And there are other words that are like that as well. And then we have a few that end with A, regardless of what they are. So for instance, Policia. Now, Policia can refer to the police in general, or you can say el policía or la policía to talk about a police officer. If it's a man, el policía, it's going to end with A anyway. Or if it's a woman, la policía. Several profession words end with ista, and they are the same way. So we could have el dentista or la dentista. We could have el artista or la artista, and so forth. So quite a few of these kind of profession words end with A, and we just have to use the article, the word for the, to tell us whether it's a man or a woman. Just one final thing about gender and groups of people. Again, like if you had the word amigos, for instance, it means friends. If we just use that word, we might mean friends who are all boys because this is masculine form, or we might mean a mixed group of friends, boys and girls. The only time we're going to use the feminine form is if we know or are reasonably sure that the group only includes girls. So amigas would be my friends, but I'm telling you that not only are they my friends, but that they're all girls. If we're not sure, or if it's a mixed group or whatever, we're going to go with the masculine form of those words when we're talking about a group.